Okay. So we're on our third week of the interracial relationship series. And I think this week we're going to address like one of the most common questions that we get, which is like, how do your parents feel about it? Um, and so I thought we should just kind of bring that up and just discuss it. If you want to go.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I feel like my situation's a little bit unique because for me to bring someone of a different race home, I feel like my mom's already laid that groundwork. You know what I mean? Like, for those of you who don't know, like I grew up in an Asian house. My father is Nigerian. So like that was already a thing. you know, I feel like I was obviously really young when my father moved into the house with my grandparents and my mom, and I wasn't really privy to how like any tension that was there beyond just nothing really. It wasn't until like I was much older and started to kind of like dig around and like figure out or like ask questions that I got to see that there was a little bit of tension. I know we want to address like, like I don't know, like I think the difference for me is because like Filipinos, like my family, they were immigrants. My dad also an immigrant. So I feel like there was a mutual understanding there. Again, I'm kind of speculating and just going based on like the recalled memories of my parents and grandparents. I do feel like there was an understanding there. I think that any tension that they may have had were just in relation to the relationship itself, and maybe not so much, because there was a lot like of stuff that I don't want to get into because I don't want to stray. But I don't feel as if there was any racial or cultural issue. As a matter of fact, to this day, my grandmother still asks for my father's cooking, and remembers like his cultural food, and it's one of her favorite foods. So I don't think that was an issue in my household specifically. And fast forward to now with my relationship with Justin, a white guy coming into my household. I mean, if anything, it would be a culture shock for him, which we've talked about. But he grew up in downtown Toronto, so he spent a lot of time in like I guess a different type of eclectic neighborhood where he spent a lot of time with Asians. So it's not super new to him. There are some things that are, I guess, take a little bit getting used to because Filipinos are very family oriented and always together, but nothing crazy that I can really speak to, at least not in the forefront of my mind. So
yeah. And how does his family feel about it? Or
that's a good
like,
question.
do you not know based on what they've ever said to him directly, like behind closed doors?
Yeah, I mean, from what I know, based on like Justin and I have a pretty transparent communication between us. From what I know, there isn't really anything that anyone has ever said to him specifically regarding me not being white. Um, but what I will say is that just like being around his family, there isn't really like his family has what do you call it? Like a blended family. I think that's the official term. Where it's like there's like stepbrothers and this and that, like there's already an eclectic mix in there. So I feel like that also has kind of laid some type of, or created some type of like, I don't even know what to call it, like flexibility for how a family should be or what a family needs to look like. Granted, every single person in his family is white, don't get me wrong, no one else is in an interracial relationship at all.
Right.
But I think that it just kind of lends to the flexibility of what they think a family should be.
That makes sense.
In regards to like race and culture, like I know there are some things that happen, not necessarily with his family, but maybe with like family friends, like just like little comments that I hear and I'm just like, oh, that's not appropriate. Like, or, or just things that maybe I observe differently, that I'm just not used to, but nothing crazy. Nothing crazy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Um Okay, so my family, like in genuine Asian form, we've never talked about it. We've never talked about dating, sex, dating outside of the race, boys, having babies, marriage. Like, we don't talk about any of that stuff. And I think with a lot of Asian families, some of that stuff is expected. Like, yes, you will get married. Yes, you will have kids. Yes, you will date an Asian boy. So I think it was expected, but never openly discussed. And so I wasn't sure. I didn't bring a lot of boys home. My last boyfriend like accidentally met my dad because we were like in the same restaurant, and I was like, ugh. But I purposely didn't bring people who are not serious to meet like the family. So I kind of set that precedent for my family, like, it's not serious. You're not going to meet anyone until you're serious. So I don't think my parents had a gauge of like, where's she going? You know, like, who's she dating? But I also don't think, I think it was a learning process for them too, because I think coming from Asia, where the race is Asian and you have no other race. I mean, back then, now there's like other expats, but I think to them it's just like, yeah, you would date someone Asian. Like, what else? What other option do you have? And then I think them watching us grow up in the US and the diversity that we're surrounded with, then they were like, oh, I guess they do have other choices. So I think so it wasn't explicitly said to us or anything, but I think they were just watching to see what we would do. And I was, when I introduced them to Anand, it was just like, okay, like, is he a good guy? Like, you know? Yeah. So a lot of our conversation, actually, I've had zero conversations with my family still to this day about like, do you care that he's Black? Because I think at this point, we're just past that, you know, like, you can't really change it. I'm going to be marrying this guy. So like, you can't change his skin color.
Yeah.
But I do think it was a transition period for my parents, having to recognize that we didn't grow up in the same, you know, places they did. And we're exposed to this in our media with our friends. These are our peers. So, yeah, like, I think they were just like, okay, let's just go along with whatever she does, you know, at least she's getting married, that type of stuff. I think. Because again, we've never discussed any of it. This is just what I'm guessing from my family.
So I have two questions for you. One, from a cultural perspective, like, has there ever been like a moment of like, how do I say this? Like, a not awkward moment, but for lack of a better word, that's not coming to me right now. Like, has there ever been an awkward moment where like, because you said he's been with you to Taiwan. I know you mentioned that before. Was there ever anything weird there? Introducing him to your family, your extended family, or like any cultural expectations that they had of him? So that's the first question. And then my second question is, are you purposely not asking because you're afraid of what they'll say, or because you genuinely believe that it's just not even an issue?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to answer that first. I had it in my head very early on that I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my relationships, right? Like, if my family, and again, this is all in my head, right? I was thinking, if my family ever says I can't be with someone for the color of their skin, well, then I guess they're not going to be my family. Like, so, yeah. And that was before this relationship. So I already had it early on in my head that morally for myself, if I felt like this was a good person and somebody else was trying to tell me that just because based on their skin color, whatever, then I was just going to like shun them. So I'm not afraid to ask them because I've already made up my mind about it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
really, if they said anything, they would have to make the decision whether they want to be in my life or not. Because from my point of view, it's already black and white. I just don't want to ask them to make them feel uncomfortable, because we're
For no
not,
reason.
yeah, we're not really a family of like great open communication, tell me your feelings. We're just kind of like, let's deal with what we have here. And it hasn't been tense or anything like that, to the point where I felt like, okay, I need to say something because I feel like there's something you guys aren't saying. So
Right.
pretty much from like when they've met him until now, and like most people feel this way when they meet Anand, he has like an aura to him that really overshadows any other like
Yes.
judgments people would have based on like skin
Yeah.
color or whatever. So he's the
Yeah.
perfect person to like throw into a racist group and be like, talk to this black guy, you know, they're great, you know. So my parents pretty much just saw straight through to his personality. So if they had any like hesitations about interracial relationships, they never explicitly showed it. It was never tense. They never said anything to me about it. They never made me feel like, okay, I need to bring something up because, you know, there's underlying whatever. And yes, I did bring him to Taiwan, and culturally there weren't any expectations because they knew like he's not Asian. Like I can't
Yeah.
expect him to, you know. um and that was a pretty cool thing because you saw one race invite another race, like the racism separation was very clear, right? Like, oh, here is a black guy in an Asian country. So it's like right there, elephant in the room. But they were so welcoming because of that. And they'd be like, oh, I don't know if he's like used to eating these things. Like we eat these things in Taiwan. Is he okay?
Right.
And then him being vegetarian, um, they like overextended themselves to cater to him, his dietary needs, seeing if he's okay. Does he like this? Is he okay staying here? So, but that's more so the experience of my family and of Taiwan. I think the people in Taiwan are just very like, um, yeah. And like, funny story, we were walking down like a fishing village, so like not a big city, and there was an older guy crossing the street, and he was shocked to see like an African American, and he was like, oh yeah, hey, kind of like a
Yeah. Yeah.
welcome
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
Taiwan thing.
Right. Right. Like,
And
thanks for
it was,
coming. Yeah. Like.
yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but you could see that he was shocked because it was
Of
like,
course.
we don't look the same and you're here, cool, you know. So I think there were no cultural expectations of him, and
Right.
he has said he had a really good experience there. So
That's amazing.
it's just proof that like we can mesh, guys.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Absolutely.
But
Wow.
aside from culture, like aside from racial cultural expectations, there are other um, expectations within the culture that um, sometimes aren't as apparent. Like explain what, like how would your kids be raised? You know?
Right. Yeah. Hey, that's a good one. So my expectation is that, like, growing up in a Filipino household, like with immigrants, like there are certain sentiments and nuances that you just kind of pick up. To explain them to you would kind of be really time consuming. So I'll just leave it at that. There are just nuances that come with being of a certain culture or being raised a
Mm-hmm.
certain way, particularly from immigrants. I would want to raise my kids with those same sentiments. Um, and just from a religious standpoint, like I do plan on baptizing them to be Catholic, similar to like what, or just exactly like as I am. My expectation of Justin is that he also gets baptized to be Catholic so that we can get married in a Catholic church. And just to clarify, I'm not super religious. So I understand why this might not make sense to a lot of people. And to be honest, it doesn't always make sense to me, but it's been such a big part of my life, and such an important part in so many ways, to my family. So I just feel like it's a necessary thing for us to do. But aside from that, I do consider my kids to be that. I do think they will be raised, or my plan is to raise them as Filipinos.
And the Catholic thing is more than just religion. It's because like Filipinos, like, is Catholicism like the religion in Philippines?
Yeah, so generally speaking, both Filipinos and Nigerians are very, very religious. So
Mm-hmm.
being Catholic is a big part of Filipino culture, I guess. Like there's a lot of inside jokes that we make. But apart from that, like it's not just being Catholic. Like most Filipinos are actually Muslim.
Ah,
Just
okay.
as many, yeah, just as many Africans are, just because they're just so religious. So I
Mm-hmm.
can't even say they're just so Catholic, they're just so religious. So there's a myriad of, just the main ones are Muslim and Catholic. My family
Yeah.
is Catholic. So yeah, like I just feel like that's important. I feel like religion for the most part is really good at instilling morality in
Yeah.
people, particularly at a young age. Like I used to go to church weekly with my grandparents, at a very young age. And I think that that's been really important in my life. So it's kind of like a mix. Like, yes, okay, it is. I don't want to say it's part of being Filipino, but it definitely comes with the territory in my family.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is just like personal preference. Like I don't think I would do it if it was just one, like for being Filipino. Like there's so many other things to being Filipino than being Catholic.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, how does Justin feel about like having to convert and raising his kids Filipino?
Yeah, like
And
so he's cool.
does he feel like your kids are gonna have to learn Tagalog? Which is
Yeah.
the well, I'll let you
Language.
explain what that is. Yeah.
It's one of the many, it's like the main language like of the Philippines. So interestingly enough, like Justin and I do plan on learning both of our languages. So his family, part of his family is French. So we will be learning Tagalog. That's in our plan. And we will also be learning French. There's a little bit more history behind the French part. Like I used to take extended French in school. Beyond that, I stopped. It's something that he also used to take as well. So it just makes sense um, to add that. And like, I'm not trying to make it like so one-sided. Like when I say I want to raise my kids Filipino, like, yes, language is involved. Yes, culture is involved. The food is a big part of it. Like I don't want my kids to lose those roots. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not to say, like, I know a lot of people are probably sitting here thinking like, well, aren't you also Nigerian? Yes, that's correct. They will be eating Nigerian food as well. But please understand, from a cultural perspective, that's just not how I was raised. Like for sure there's sentiments there, but my dad was part of my life for like a year when I was a
Right.
kid. So the influence is very different. There
Yeah.
are tons of other things that I can take from my time with him, but for the most part, it will have a very strong Filipino influence. But to answer your question about how he feels about converting, Justin's family is all Catholic. He's the only one who was never
Oh.
baptized, largely
Oh.
in part. Oh yeah, sorry, that's our wrap up. So largely in part due to the fact that his grandmother was not alive at the time. Both of his
Gotcha.
grandparents, like very, very strict Catholics. So there's no
To
way that wouldn't have
enforce
happened.
it.
Yeah, so he would have been baptized if his grandmother was alive at the time of his birth, but she wasn't.
Yeah.
So he's not. So that's something that's just kind of like on the list of things to do, so to speak.
Yeah.
So he'll match the rest of the family.
That kind of works out. Um, yeah, so like you guys can see how family influence, but not just like our parents, just culturally, how that would influence like our relationships. So if you guys have any stories or if you have any specific questions about like how our family or parents dealt with anything, let us know.
Yeah, especially like the tense ones. I want to hear about those. Like I know it's 2020, so it's maybe few and far between, but I can only imagine that it still happens. Like I've heard stories amongst friends So I would love to hear some of yours if you're willing to share that.
Yes. Comment below.
Yeah.
See you next week.
See you next.
Bye.
Yeah.